Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host Jacob Shorba, and it is time for us to review the 2023 NFL Draft for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So, Day 3's wrapped up. It is 10 p.m. where I'm at, so a few hours have gone by since the draft. Shocking how many selections the team made, right? 13 selections. I think you've got some really nice players in here. You've got some guys as well that you just quite frankly look at and think might not have a big role with the team long term, but that's just kind of the nature of every draft. And so we're going to hop into it. We're going to talk about 8 of these guys. The last 5 that we've got from this draft class, and you're really not going to go into because I don't know a ton on them, and I'm not sure how big of an impact they're going to have. And if they have a big impact, well, they're going to be a lot different than the evaluation we give them. So we're going to talk about the top 8. So let's go ahead and let's start first with Anton Harrison. Before doing that, I just want to explain what I've got here. I've made a depth chart essentially with all the players that we've acquired this offseason, all the players that were currently here, new additions that were added in free agency, or via trade last year, however it was, that just weren't playing on the team or were injured last year, are going to be in bold, and they're not going to be italicized. And anyone we added through the draft this year will be italicized with an R next to their name, designating them as a rookie. We're also projecting where these players go on the depth chart. So, for example, and I'll talk about this later too, I do think that as of now, Trey Herndon is above Antonio Johnson. Might make some people angry, but I would expect that at this point based off of where they drafted him. But we'll get into that later. So I've got him here just because I think by the beginning of the season or early on in the season, he's going to be the guy who starts. I also think you look at the offensive line, this is what I'm guessing will happen. I could be dead wrong, but I think this will end up being the lineup. So let's talk about Anton Harrison with that said. So, you thought probably a week ago that tackle is really not a huge need on this team, right? Like, you'd like to get a backup. And it didn't seem like the Jaguars would go that direction. However, the organization knew things we didn't. Cam Robinson ended up being suspended this season, probably for 6 games. Don't know that for a fact at this point, but you know you're not going to have him for a bit. And so Jacksonville, they had a player rated really high on their board. He was the highest rated guy for them at 24. They traded back twice, acquired extra capital, got a 4th, got a 5th, and got a 7th out of it. So did that for 3 spots. So pretty impressive the amount they were able to get. And they ended up landing the player they wanted. Anton Harrison, in his time at Oklahoma, has ended up playing on the right side, but also played on the left, mainly on the left this last season. So you do get a guy who could play on either side. He's talked about being able to fit into that right tackle role if needed, so you could see him play there. I do believe that Anton Harrison is going to start at tackle for this team throughout the season. That's what you drafted him for. They did say he can play guard if needed, but I think he's going to be good enough that first year to be able to carve out a role at tackle. And what I think will also happen is you'll have Walker Little at the other tackle position. You could flip these guys, but I think Little's going to earn it. I think he earned it last year, quite frankly. I think he's just going to prove it again. And I think Cam Robinson is probably going to be in a season where he's just got to play at guard, and he's probably going to go to another team after this. Now, I don't know that for a fact. I could be dead wrong. He could come back as the left tackle and could be kept around past this season. But, the best ability is availability, and Cam Robinson hasn't been available for this franchise, regardless of whether or not it's his fault. Can't blame an injury on him. You can blame it on his body if you want, but he doesn't control that really much at all, if at all. The PED suspension, though, that's debatable. Could have been something accidental. Could have also been something he knew very well of to, say, speed up injury recovery. So, yeah, for Cam Robinson, I don't think he's going to be a starting tackle this year unless we have an injury. So this is what you're looking at. So talking about Anton Harrison as a player, let's do that. Anton Harrison is one of the best movers at the tackle position. He's very talented at that. He's quick. He's nimble. You're going to like that in the system. We run this zone blocking scheme for running backs. He's very good in that scheme. Where he needs to improve is being able to sustain blocks. And so you've got these small problems with him. Really aren't a huge issue to us, honestly. And you're getting a guy that some people viewed as potentially even the second tackle in this class. Some will say first, but to me, I can't put him above Paris Johnson. I think Paris Johnson just kind of fits the bill for everything you could ask for. But if you want to argue him over Peter Skoronski, you can do that if you want. I personally wouldn't put him second, but I think he's close. So Skoronski, you can argue it because of size, right? The arm length isn't that great. You could talk about Broderick Jones just because of refinement. I think Anton Harrison's more refined of a prospect. And I also still think he has really nice athleticism and frame to be able to be put up against Broderick Jones. And then Darnell Wright, quite frankly, I just wasn't that high on. I didn't think he was super impressive. And that's the opinion that some other people hold as well. So they got a tackle that I think at least was better than one of the ones who went before and was the best one on the board at this point. And the big part of this is what they did to the other contenders in the AFC. Because you look at the trade they did with the Bills, right? The Bills trade up from 27 to 25. Get Dalton Kincaid. They got to give up a fourth, though. I don't think that the Bills had to make that trade up, but Jacksonville still got it out of them. So you got capital from the Bills. The Bills take a player with that trade that Jacksonville clearly wasn't going to take at 27, after they moved to that slot, but someone I think the Bengals and Chiefs very well could have used, and that's Dalton Kincaid. I like Kincaid a lot during this process. Made a ton of sense for the Cincinnati Bengals. They need a tight end, and I think he could have fit in pretty well there. I think he's going to be great wherever he goes as a receiving threat, and obviously that's with Buffalo. But Kansas City would have been the perfect place for him too. Spend a few years under Kelsey. You got your heir apparent. You got a pretty damn good tight end. You got your guy for Mahomes for the future. So, those picks would have been really nice for both those teams. And then you snag Anton Harrison. For both the Chiefs and the Bengals at that point in the draft, I think the biggest need was tackle. And they both made good selections still. You got Myles Murphy off the board. You got Felix Anudike-Uzomah. But both teams wanted Anton Harrison, in my opinion. Or at least to my knowledge. I think he was better than both of those players who went off the board, or at least more valuable to those franchises, because you look at Cincinnati. Yes, they picked up Orlando Brown. Yes, they have Jonah Williams, but Williams wants out. Doesn't want to play there. And they're going to have to get, they really needed to address tackle. I don't know whether they did or not after that, but that was a move I felt like they needed to do. Kansas City, they ended up getting it later, but if you picked up Anton Harrison at 31, you're talking about Kansas City having a great offensive line, because if you make that move, I think Anton Harrison wins the left tackle job. I do think he's better at that than Jawan Taylor because, Anton Harrison's actually played the position. You put Jawan back on the right, all of a sudden Kansas City's got an elite offensive line across all 5 positions. Whereas right now, I think you look at how it's lining up going into the season, you feel so much better going up against Jawan at left and Wanya Morris at right than you would have against Anton Harrison at left, Jawan Taylor at right. So this is where the Anton Harrison pick really gained steam for being a great selection. As much as I didn't expect it and probably wouldn't have made this selection, I wanted Brian Branch at this point in the draft. It's still a fantastic pick. And you see the damage that it did to these other contenders. I think that damage can be impactful past this season. I think Harrison's going to be a great player in the NFL. We'll see how that turns out. But this pick, I'm going to give an A. This is one of the best ones of the draft, only second to the one at 160 that we'll obviously talk about. But we'll move through these other ones a little faster. Just want to give that one the proper time because that's our biggest pick of the night. That's the best player we acquired and the most impactful move. So, you like what it did. I think you also got to mention the run game. I think it's going to do wonders for that. And these next two picks we're also going to talk about for the run game. So, Brenton Strange was the pick at 61. And out of every pick in this draft, this was the one I gave the lowest grade. And the reason why I gave it the lowest grade was because, well, I can see him being a fun weapon in the Doug Peterson offense. One, I don't think he was worth 61. I could eat my words on that. I hope I do. However, the bigger problem for me was the fact that they traded back with O'Cyrus Torrence on the board at 56. Now, apparently there's a rumor that this was because O'Cyrus Torrence had character issues. Nothing I had heard of before, not really something we were aware of, but that's the rumor. If that's the case and they were really bad, okay. But that's hard to believe. And not calling the team a liar or calling the person who put out a liar, but I just haven't seen that of O'Cyrus Torrence. I don't think he's a terrible guy. And I think he was a draftable prospect, and I think he was by far the best player on the board at that point. They also had opportunities to trade up for a player like Brian Branch. And if you didn't want to give up that much capital, Cam Smith was falling down the board. Two players that would have been really nice to fill that slot role and play in another position if needed. So that's where I get a D- here. So it's a reach, right? You didn't get players that shouldn't have been there, and you could have stolen. And so that's my problem with it. But you are going to get a guy who looks like a Doug Peterson tight end. You are going to get a tight end that, unlike, I guess, you look at a guy like Kincaid, he looks like a Peterson tight end. He's a receiving threat. But what a guy like Strange has is the blocking ability too. He can help you out in that facet. He is more of a balanced tight end. You even saw the guy used as a fullback. Doug Peterson is a creative, offensive-minded head coach. And you see with some of these picks, they went after guys to give them more options on the offense. They went after guys that are going to help them on those 3rd and 1 situations, 4th and 1s, red zone opportunities. That was a big focus for this team. And I do think the Brenton Strange pick does help with that. And I like what it offers. So that's all good. And the final thing I'll mention on it, having a balanced tight end is important because we haven't had that. And what it offers you, secondly here, is that you don't know if you're on the defense what that guy's role is for a play. When you saw Chris Manhertz trot out into the field, you're guessing this has got to be him blocking on that play. Might be more likely to be a run. If you saw Evan Ingram on the field, you're probably guessing pass. So you can figure out more when a guy is only used in one way. Brenton Strange is going to be used in a multitude of ways, so you're going to feel good about that on offense. It's going to help you disguise your plays. Because otherwise, if that wasn't a factor, everyone would just pick 3 tight ends. One of them, or each one would be good at something different, right? They'd focus on that specifically, get great at that. You just play whichever one you needed. But it just simply doesn't work that way because you can't disguise plays and the defense can prepare. Brenton Strange helps you with that. So there is value in it. I can't give it an F because of that, but I still hate the prospects that they skipped over at this point. Now the 3rd round, and if you watched any of the streams, this was the one I was probably the most confused over, other than maybe Ventrell Miller, which we'll talk about next after. But I came around to liking this because I thought more in terms of the long-term future for this team and the player that he is. Tank Bigsby at 88 overall. First pick that we didn't trade out of or trade up from. Now, to be fair, didn't trade up at any point in the draft, right? But we traded 4 times back in this draft to acquire capital or to get capital in the future. So with the Tank Bigsby pick, it wasn't a need, right? You could have gone other directions. Clark Phillips was sitting there on the board. I wish he was a Jacksonville Jaguar right now. But what you get in Tank Bigsby is you get a guy who's going to be a short yard bruiser. You get a guy who's strong, has elite vision. He's going to help you a ton as a complementary back. He's going to be a really good fit with Travis Etienne. Those guys complement each other very well. You like what you have there. And you're gonna have these guys around. You'd have to imagine 3 more years together at bare minimum, right? Because with Travis Etienne, he's got 2 years left on that rookie deal. He's also a first-round pick, which means you get the 5th-year option. And with Tank Bigsby, obviously you got 4 here because rookie deal, non-first-round pick. Travis Etienne is your shorter guy in terms of the tenure they have here, but that's still 3 years if you accept that 5th-year option, which I imagine they will when we get around to that. So you got a nice group of young backs in here. You've got guys behind them that you can trust. You know, you like Hasty as more of the receiving guy in terms of complementary backs. And I think Dearness Johnson, it wouldn't shock me if he stole a big role in this offense in the running game behind Travis Etienne. He's that good of a player. But unfortunately, this is a crowded room, and someone is not going to get the snaps that they deserve. And I feel like it could be him just based off the contract he was offered when he came in, the fact that Bigsby was an early pick and Hasty got signed for 2 years. So we'll see what happens. But I still think the Tank Bigsby pick was solid. I think they got a good player. They also got someone who should have been gone the 2nd or the early 3rd. So I'll give this one a B+. Now the next one, this will be my 2nd lowest grade of the night for the draft, and it was Ventrell Miller. I don't hate the prospect, right? I think he is a good linebacker in this class. However, when you look at the depth chart here, he's the 4th string guy at linebacker. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he will see no snaps, because they are going to move guys around. You're going to see Devin Lloyd in more pass rushing situations. That's going to open up snaps for Muma. Muma also played sometimes in more of that, what do they call it, the star position. So it's kind of that mix of a linebacker and a guy who plays a safety role. So he might help with your slot needs a bit. So if you see those guys move around, that opens up the snaps for Shaquille Quarterman and Ventrell Miller. Miller can beat out Quarterman for those snaps. I don't know if he does. I set him behind him for now because I think Quarterman's proven he's worthy on this team of being a good backup and being the next guy up. So Miller's got to prove it. So he'll have some snaps, right? But it's the 4th round. You had really good players still available there. You had the opportunity to trade up. And ultimately, they claim teams wouldn't do it. I think they're right and wrong on that because maybe teams were less willing to move, but I also think Jacksonville's kind of stingy on draft capital. I have yet to see a trade with just picks only where Jacksonville loses it. They're usually getting good deals. So they're very specific on what they want. I think that played a factor. I think it kept them from moving, and I can accept that. But it doesn't mean you're going to get an A+ for that. Now, what Ventrell Miller will offer you is a really good special teamer. That is where he's going to thrive, and that was a key message on the 3rd day from the staff. They wanted to get guys who'd help on special teams. So Ventrell Miller will help you with that, but ultimately I don't think he's a guy who's going to have a massive impact on this team unless you see Chad Muma or Devin Lloyd not work out in the NFL. So it's a low ceiling move. It's a not necessarily a low 4 move, but it ain't a high 4 move. So I'm going to give this one a D. And you know, like I said, I don't hate the prospect. I hate the role because I don't think he's getting enough on this team. You know, it's just simply not the opportunity. Now, this is the point in the draft where things started to get a lot better because we were joking around on the stream. We were joking around on Twitter before that. It did not feel like the draft was going that well after the first day. However, at 130, after the Jaguars trade 127 for a future 4th and a 7th round selection this year from the New Orleans Saints, they ended up picking Tyler Lacey. This was a player they met with before the draft, and it's a guy who's going to compare pretty close to Roy Robertson Harris. Now, he's going to have to develop. He's not going to come in and play that exact same role at the same level. It's very unlikely. But this is a guy with high character. He's going to fit in with this system. He's going to be a nice depth piece. You get a backup at that position, which I don't think that's an extremely strong position. I think it's more so a position that they have solidified and gotten players who can start at, just not ones who blow you out of the water. So you get a solid backup there. You like that entirely, Lacey. You think he can carve out a bit of a role. And so that pick's solid. You know, you still have players I would have rather taken, of course, but this is around where he should have gone. It's a good pick. You can fit him into the team. I'd give this one a B or a B-. Now the next one of my favorites of the draft. They picked up Yasir Abdullah at 136 overall. So for Abdullah, just kind of the short thing on him. It's a guy coming off injury. We'll look at his profile here. Can't remember what the injury was. I believe it was an off-season injury. But he was an extremely productive player at college. You see his, we'll look at his snaps, like where he played. But look at his sacks here. See a lot of these games he's getting a sack. He had a 3-sack performance here against North Carolina State. And then even at Cincinnati, it looks like 2 down here. Although I can't scroll down. Yeah, 2 sacks. There we go. In their bowl game. So showed up in a big moment. This guy's productive. See his pass rush grade, really good. So this is the kind of pick you really like at this point. There are concerns, of course, with size. He's not a super tall guy. But this is where you take a guy like that. He's going to be a nice guy to add in some speed element to the pass rush. And he's going to be easily comped to Arden Key, right? What he will do better than Arden Key, and you'll see it in some of these grades, not all of them, but most of them, he covers a bit better. He's going to improve you in that aspect. So this is going to be your Arden Key replacement. He's going to need time to, of course, get up to speed in the NFL, but a really nice edge player to add in. We look at where he played. You see a lot of the same role that you got from Josh Allen. So if we sort this, nearly all these snaps are at outside linebacker, which is what you get, you know, like I said, when you look at Josh Allen. So this pick for me, I'm going to give it an A-. Technically, there's better players on the board here, but I'm not complaining because this is a really good pick. It's a guy I think I could see having an impact, and I feel good knowing that the backups, or at least the rotational guys, are going to be nice young players that you can develop into a good role on this team. You also still have cap space to go make a move. I think the team needs to, and we'll probably see that on Monday at the earliest once the compensatory picks for 2024 finalize. But I like this move for Jacksonville. I think they got a great player. However, we're going to talk about the best acquisition of this draft considering where he was picked, and that's Antonio Johnson from Texas A&M. We talked about this guy back in, I think, January and February, and it wasn't a ton of talk, but it was mentioned. We talked about Antonio Johnson at 24 overall in this draft. There's nothing that's happened since then and now that should have tanked his stock. Yet he ended up falling. He ended up getting picked over way too many times, and even by Jacksonville. You know, there were 5 opportunities in my mind where you could have said this was one of the best players on the board, or in most opportunities, the clear best player on the board, and decided to select him. Yet the team didn't. You know, and so what it tells me is they are lower on him than what we expected. However, they were higher on him than all these other teams. They ended up picking him. You know, or maybe these other teams just happen to have a prospect higher that helped out. But this is a steal. You're getting this guy like 100 snaps, or not 100 snaps, 100 selections after when you thought he'd go. Because he was kind of seen late in the process as maybe a late day 2, or not late day 2, but late second round pick. Screwing up my words here, but 100 picks later, right? I mean, that's got to be a steal. And I don't think it's the biggest one of the draft out of all the prospects. I think even with Brian Branch going freaking 115 selections earlier, that's still more of a steal because I think Brian Branch was the perfect slot corner. Now, Antonio Johnson, can be really good at slot corner. And what he will offer you is a guy with good size, a guy that's surprisingly fluid, especially for having high hips and being tall. He's going to be strong. He's going to be a big hitter. He's going to help you out against the run. But the big thing, he's going to help out this team against tight ends, something they really struggled against in 2022. So you can't neutralize Travis Kelce entirely. However, you can try to slow him down, and this is the kind of player you get to try to do that. So I like this pick a lot for this reason. I'm shocked they skipped him so many times, and at that point in the draft, I was shocked they took him, because I thought there's no way they're picking him at this point with how many times they've said no. So Antonio Johnson is a Jacksonville Jaguar. We got saved by the bell last second, finally got that slot corner, and quite frankly, if this team didn't land Antonio Johnson in this draft, I would have a very different grade on the entire draft as a whole. But they do. They get a good player. They get him dirt cheap. And they're going to be happy when they see how good he is on the field. What I do want to caution you guys over, though, before we get to our final player, wide receiver from Penn State and Parker Washington, I would not expect Antonio Johnson to walk into training camp with the expectation that he is the starter for 2023. Now, that does not mean I don't think he will earn it. I think with where he was selected and what they said about him, like I said earlier, it's clear that the Jaguars were not as high on this player as we thought they were or the consensus was. So are they going to see him as a starter over Trey Herndon going into camp? I don't think so. I think they showed that they're comfortable with Trey Herndon, whether or not we agree with it. And I think they showed that Antonio Johnson comes in as a really good special teamer with room to grow into something more. Now, I absolutely believe he's going to become something more. And down the road, you could see Antonio Johnson as a replacement for Rayshon Jenkins. That's another route they could go. Got a very similar build, just kind of generally a better prospect in theory than what Jenkins was, but obviously a player that has to go prove it in the NFL. He hasn't done that yet. None of these players have had that opportunity. So, Antonio Johnson, great pick, but that's something we got to understand. Something that unfortunately we're probably going to have to be pretty patient with. Probably is going to annoy us a lot during training camp, but I think it's going to get sorted out at some point. Because, hey, if Antonio Johnson can't beat Trey Herndon for the starting role at nickel, it either means Trey Herndon's a hell of a lot better or Antonio Johnson just plain old sucks, and that's why he was taken there. I don't think that that's going to be the case, though. So Parker Washington, final pick here. I gave this one a C. I think he's a fun receiver, but I think at this point in the draft, it was clear that he was not the best fit for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think it was a missed opportunity because Xavier Hutchinson was on the board staring straight at you and you let him fall to Houston. Now, I try not to get too angry about players I really want going to other teams or not being selected by Jacksonville, but this is one that I don't think there's as much reason to skip over. I don't see anything on film with Xavier Hutchinson that says he's not clearly worth this selection. I had him as a second round grade. I understand that most people didn't. I understand that most people had him as a third or fourth. Some even had him as a fifth. But we're talking about the 6th round. We're talking about a guy that is very similar to Marvin Jones, someone you replaced, someone that you used really well last year, and a guy who can play all over the formation. Parker Washington isn't going to do that. Now, he's great at contested catches, probably more so than Xavier Hutchinson, surprisingly, because both are really good at it. But for Parker Washington, I don't think he has the size to play on the outside, or if you're putting him there, it's not a good situation for him. So now you have Jamal Agnew, you have Parker Washington as backups at slot, but on the outside, it's just Tim Jones. So that's my concern there. I wanted to see the team add another receiver to be safe behind the outside players in Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones. Unfortunately, even with the addition of Parker Washington, that was not something that got done. So the This pick, I gave it a C for that reason. He's going to be a nice backup in the slot, has amazing catchability, and has really good elusiveness. But, aside from the size, this is a guy that has no burst. You watch him on film, he needs a runway to get going. And, if you can give him that, it's going to be a great play. But you're not always going to be able to get that. So, this pick, it's got its good, it's got its bad. That's why it's getting a middle-of-the-road C. Now, I'm not going to review these last guys, like I said, because I really don't know a ton about them. I didn't put them on here because I don't have information I can give you guys that's going to be anything new or anything really helpful aside from what you'll read through a draft profile or through guys on, say, Twitter that know about them, that are scouts in the news area. So that's not going to happen, but I will say that what we do know, the Jaguars are going to make more moves. They talked about that. Monday is going to be the first day where I think that happens, outside of just obviously getting the UDFAs from this draft. Because on Monday, compensatory picks finalize. Jacksonville is going to have a few next year, I believe 2. We'll take a look at them real quick. As of now, they will have, I believe this will be the 97th selection, assuming no one lost a pick. So they're going to have the highest compensatory pick because of Jawan Taylor. They're going to have a 6th rounder from the loss of Arden Key. And according to this, looks like we're drafting Mr. Irrelevant. I didn't think Marvin Jones would make it on this list, but if all things stay the same and this is correct, Jacksonville will have the final pick in the 2024 NFL draft. So that'll be kind of fun. So that's where they sit right now. Talk about future picks. I believe that would put them at 12, maybe 11, because you're going to lose one from Calvin. You got the 4th from the Saints. You had a 6th from the Laviska Shenault trade. That puts you at 10. You get your 3 from compensatory, and you lose 1 from Calvin Ridley. So going to be around 12 picks next year. They're going to be loaded again. It's just going to be a lonely second round, but all will be fine. Overall, this draft for me gets a solid B- because they were able to eventually address many of these needs. Not all, but many of them. I do feel like there were a lot of missed opportunities in this draft. Just to name them, I think Brian Branch or Cam Smith, 2 players you could have easily traded up for. If you had to overpay for them, you're overpaying for them. They are worth so much more than the places they went at, I believe, 45 and 51. I don't think many people are complaining about getting them at that point, and I think they're quite frankly thrilled. I think Osiris Torrance getting passed at 56 is crazy. I'm assuming that he hasn't done something awful off the field, but if he has, I understand that then. I think Clark Phillips at 88 was an obvious pick too, someone they met with, someone that fits what you need. They didn't go that route. And then Xavier Hutchinson later in the draft was a player I felt like was really obvious for the organization that instead goes to a division rival, will probably start for them, carve out a role there, and be a player you have to fight against every season for at least a while. But I could be wrong on that. That's just how I feel about Xavier Hutchinson. Now, analyzing the roster, I think you feel pretty good about what Jacksonville has, especially if they're able to get a couple guys who can help out at a few of these positions as backups. So, big changes from last year. Tank Bigsby, Dearness Johnson added to the run game. I think Bigsby's going to be a great complement. Going to really help things out. Stoop Connor's going to get shuffled out by this. Johnson's going to be a guy that you think, if absolutely necessary, could be the number 1 guy. We've seen teams that will move a guy who isn't the second string into the starting role because it's better for a guy like Bigsby to stay in that role. That's why, for example, with the Dallas Cowboys, why Pollard wouldn't necessarily get all the snaps when Zeke Elliott was out of a game. So I think you see Dearness Johnson in that kind of role if ETN goes down, and JaMychal Hasty probably plays more of your receiving back. So I like what they're doing. I like what they have there. I think it's a really good running back room. You look at wide receiver, Calvin Ridley's a great addition. Parker Washington's going to be a fun one. Not exactly what you want as far as the ideal backup, but he's going to be someone they're going to use as an offensive weapon. You look at the tight end room, there were better prospects in this draft, but Brenton Strange is a fun addition to this offense. A key word we're going to talk about, fun. He's going to open up the playbook. He can play a fullback position. He can block. He can catch. He can blow guys down while he has the football. You love what he brings in. You're going to have Garrett Prince probably be elevated to the squad this year too, and you like that room going into 2023. Now the offensive line, your two changes from what you had in the playoffs last year is essentially the subtraction of Jawan Taylor and Tyler Shatley as starters, and the addition of Anton Harrison and Cam Robinson coming back from injury as starters. You'll have Ben Barchin for a few games at the beginning of the season, probably playing at left guard. Actually, not probably. He will be playing at left guard. And I think after the suspension's over, that Cam Robinson moves into a guard role with this team, or you have Anton Harrison going to that if he's struggling early on. But I think this team probably looks at Walker Little as the right tackle, sees him in that role long term, and that's how they're rolling out. You feel so much better about being a two-dimensional offense with this draft. You feel better about being able to convert on short yardage situations. I think this team's going to be a really good rushing team. And if you got Travis Etienne in your fantasy league, you might as well keep him. The only guy you're going to be worrying about taking snaps from is Bigsby. And I think Etienne's going to have a field day with some better blocking. You saw games last year like against Kansas City, Baltimore, for example, where he couldn't really run because this offensive line couldn't hold up against those defenses in the rushing attack. But it's going to change this year. I do believe that. On the defensive side of the ball, though, not a whole ton's changed. You got your nickel answer. Whether or not they recognize that now, recognize that later. Antonio Johnson's going to be your guy there. He's going to help you out a lot. He's going to help you against tight ends. So you love what happened there. And you also look at what you did with your defensive line. Yes, you lost Arden Key. DeJuan Smoot isn't back. But you got guys who can fill in those roles, help out this team, and you still have money to address that position or address that room in general. Plenty of money to do it, in fact. And then Ventrell Miller, I'm not sure he's going to have a huge impact, but he is going to be helpful on special teams. A lot of these guys are going to slot in there and help the team out in that role. So if I'm looking at what Jacksonville did, and we'll probably do a whole video on this and give it a grade based off of everything, but I think Jacksonville put together a pretty potent roster for 2023. I think this is a roster that's good enough to go win a Super Bowl. Now, doesn't mean they're absolutely going to. It wouldn't shock me if this team, say just went to a championship game and lost. They're a team that I think will win a playoff game, and anything beyond that is just guesswork. But they've got the culture now, they've got the players, and they've got the mindset to go be the team that takes on Kansas City and beats them in the playoffs. They just got to go prove it. So I like what they did. The draft was different than expected, for sure. There's things I would have changed, but ultimately they still hit a lot of needs. They hit something that I didn't think they'd be able to in the tackle position, and I think this roster is clearly better than what it was last season. So you got to love that, right? But with that said, I appreciate you guys joining me today. Appreciate you watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take some time off. This has been a long process. With that all said, finally, go Jags.